A couple of years ago, remember I've told my flagger stories, and a couple of years ago I was flagging. I used to be a flagger, for those of you that are new, at Deschutes County for a couple seasons, and that was an experience I'll never forget. And I was flagging the roundabout going into Sun River when you go down the hill. Probably the worst place to flag in all of Deschutes County. And I happen to have the section where people are coming up the hill from Sun River, and I'm stopping people right there, and they're not wanting to be stopped. Because imagine there's 3 flaggers at the roundabout, and they're all different times, and we're working on it because there's this pothole big enough for you to lose your truck in, and they're trying to get that fixed. And anyway, long story short is I'm standing there flagging, and I never look at the people I'm stopped because I don't want to gestures and things that happen, you know. And so I happened to look down, and I noticed this guy, he had this black cross on his head, and I thought to myself, like, what the heck is that? Well, then I noticed the next people coming by, they had them on, and I thought to myself, I have this huge imagination. I said, there's a satanic cult in Sun River. And I thought about that all morning. I saw these people like that. And then I was telling my buddy who works at the county, I was telling him what I saw, and he started laughing. He goes, Jones, he says, today's Wednesday. It's Ash Wednesday. Now, being a Baptist boy growing up, we didn't know anything about Ash Wednesday. But I soon found out that Ash Wednesday was an important day for those who celebrate Lent, those within not only the Catholic Church, but also the Protestant Church who celebrate that. And matter of fact, last Wednesday was Ash Wednesday, for those of you that know anything about that. And I looked it up and found out it's 40 days before Easter, and it's really a time for you to turn away from sin and to draw closer to God and to get your heart right and to be thinking about those things as you lead up to your Easter celebration. I thought that's a pretty cool idea, actually. But it's not uncommon during that Lent season for people to fast something, to give up something. And maybe you know people, and maybe some of you do that, and some of you have done that, but you give up something. And I've heard, people say, well, I gave up TV, or I gave up shopping, or I gave up coffee, or Chick-fil-A. I mean, people give up all kinds of things. And a lot of times people give them up, and they'll tell you what's for a health reason, but that's not really what Lent's about. Lent's about giving up something that will remind you all that Jesus gave up for you when he died on the cross, and to deny yourself something. Well, we're going to start a series of messages called Letting Go. And they're based on the idea that God wants us to let go of all those things that hold us back in our Christian life. And if you had to say loosely based, this is our Lent series. We do Advent here during Christmas, but we've never done Lent. So this is kind of like an idea of, let's just concentrate on those things in our Christian life that we need to let go of in order to have a deeper walk with Christ as we lead up to Easter. So that's kind of the idea. And this idea of letting go is basically one of the ideas of the Scripture talks about all over the place. My favorite verse on this is Hebrews 12:1, that says, let us lay aside every weight and sin. And in the context, he's saying the things that hold us back in our Christian faith. And notice here that he separates weight from sin. He says, let us lay aside the weights and the sin. They're two different things. So I kind of looked up the idea of weight, and that idea of weight is like have a weight on your shoulder that holds you back. And I came to realize there's a lot of good things in our life that becomes weights that hold us back from our walk with Christ. I mean, think of all the things we obsess about. I mean, I know people who obsess about the Seahawks. I mean, they put a flag on their truck and drive it around that's waving all the time. Or they wear a jersey with another man's name on the back. They obsess with that. I don't know who those people are, but some of you know about that. But we can obsess on anything. And so we want to look at letting go. And our subtitle today, and the main topic we're going to talk about today, is letting go of pride. To let go of pride in our life. And now let's just be honest here. We need to let go of pride and grab onto humility. In our text today, we're going to look at 3 examples that Jesus gives in the Sermon on the Mount. And they're 3 examples of areas of religious duty or religious things that we do where pride was involved. But I want you to think about this. This was 3 examples in their day And we have those examples in our day as well, so they kind of correlate. But we have other things in our day that pride enters into in our Christian life that holds us back, or that makes us think that we're better than what we really are. Because pride is a major issue that all of us have to deal with. It is. It's common to man. For example, the Bible talks about this, being trapped in our pride. Another place it says that our pride has deceived us. That's a great one. You think that one through. Another one says that there's the boastful pride of life. 1 John talks about that. How our culture is set up to build people up and to make them think they're greater than they really are. That's how our culture is designed. And so there's pride that just comes along with life. And so we're going to talk about that. And one of our main takeaways, and I always try to leave a takeaway. I was going to have two today, but I thought, no, I'll just stick with one. And our main takeaway is this, and remember this, we'll hit it a bunch of times today, is basically this. God always rewards humility. He always rewards humility. In 1 Peter 5:5, James 4:6, they write the same phrase when they say, God opposes the proud, but gives what? Grace to the humble. That word oppose means this. God sets himself against pride, the prideful person. When pride enters your heart, you're going directly against God. That's what he says. God opposes the proud, but he gives grace, unmerited favor to those what? Who come to him in humility. He opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So we're going to start off this morning by looking in Matthew, and our text today is Matthew chapter 6. We're going to look at verses 1 through 6, and we're going to skip down to verses 16 through 21. And we're going to start our study today in Matthew 6, verse 1. And Matthew 6, verse 1 is the general idea of what he's going to talk about in the rest of that. Remember, this is Jesus' greatest sermon, probably the greatest sermon ever preached. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. And notice what he says, Matthew 6, verse 1. He says this, beware, in other words, watch out for this, practicing your righteousness and practicing your good works or good deeds before people. In order, and this is the motivation, he says, beware of this, to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. Our study this morning is going to show us what Jesus thinks of the look at me culture we live in. I can't remember a time when more people, influencers and all these people, and all it's about is look at me, look at me, look at me, and how can I get my name out there? How can I get on TV? How can I do all of these things? And people do all kinds of crazy things so people will what? Look at them. And this culture of look at me is exactly the opposite of what Jesus is going to talk about today. So if you have your Bibles, look at me. Look at me. You like that? Yeah. I said that on purpose. I wish, right? But he's going to talk about 3 ways to let go of your pride. Okay, 3 different examples he's going to give to us. And the first one he's going to talk about there in chapter 6, verses 2 through 4, is to give humbly. Look what he says, verse 2. He says, thus when you give to the needy, it's really important to this, understand this, that they gave this way, okay? When it says to give to the needy, they gave like at the temple. And when you walked into the temple, think of it this way. When you walk into the temple, imagine there are 7 trumpets that were hung on the wall that looked like a trumpet that had a lock box on the bottom. And there were different names under each one that you would give to. Like, for example, they had a temple tax. Now, I think that's a good idea, church tax, right? You walk in and we got church. Have you paid your church tax this month? Yeah, that wouldn't be a good idea. But, that's what they did. They had like a tithe. They had the church tax. They had another tax. And they had all of these different things. And you would walk in and you would give that money, just put it down this giant horn into this lockbox, and that's how you gave. But when you gave to the needy, you gave directly to them. And so that's important to say. So Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, thus when you give to the needy, and you give directly to them, he says, sound no trumpet before you. Now, he was either talking about one of 2 things. It's interesting. One would be this. There were Pharisees who would, as they were walking through the community, or as they were given to the poor, they would sound a trumpet so that the poor people knew that they were going to be given money out, and they all would flock to the trumpet. That's what they did. But there was another scenario that they did as well. They had people who were poor who, when somebody gave them money, they would blow the trumpet. You know, it's like, hey, I got some alms. I got some money here. And they would blow the trumpet. And so the Pharisees would do what? They would only give money to the people who had the trumpet. Because they wanted what? The recognition of giving to the poor. And so he says, as the hypocrites do. And this word hypocrite, interesting word, it just means to wear a mask. It was used of an actor in their day. They played the hypocrite. In other words, you wore a mask that what you were on the outside is not what you were on the inside. To play the hypocrite. And we all know that we played the hypocrite before in our life. I say this all the time. Christianity set up for us to be a hypocrite. When you think about it. I mean, it says what? Forgive as who forgave? As Jesus forgave. How many of you live up for that every day? We talk about forgiveness, but we don't live up to perfect forgiveness all the time, every day. So we play what? The hypocrite. You always, if you're a preacher, you preach better than you are. You have nothing to say. Imagine you get up there and go, hey, I want you just to follow my life. Well, I'm not that great. You know what I'm saying? And so think about it. We always preach from God's word, which is the perfect standard on how to live our life. And so he says, hey, man, don't be a hypocrite. Don't be like them. He says, who do in the synagogues and in the streets that they may be praised by others. In other words, their motivation was simply this, to be praised by what? Other people. That's what was their key motivation. Today we call it toot your own horn. It means to talk about yourself in such a way that shows you are too proud of your achievements. Toot your own horn. A classic example of that happened like on a trip. Our youth group used to go to Mexico every year, and we camped. Okay, we camped out in this giant campground with 3,000 other high school students, and we'd have tents. Well, you know how thin-walled tents are. And so we had this big tent where our dining hall, we had the women on one side and the guys on the other side, and we would be in these tents. And some of you have gone on that trip. Tyler's here, and Steve's here, and Kath's here. And so you're in these tents, and they're really thin-walled and everything. So in Kathy's tent, there was a wall between her and another lady, and then these two other ladies are in the front, and they're talking at night. And the one lady's telling the other lady about how her and her husband bought all these Spanish Bibles to give out on the work site. And she was going on like, yeah, we did this and we did that. And Kathy and this other lady are in the back. And finally this lady who was with this lady in the front said to her, I guess you just lost your reward. That's not that funny. But Kathy and this other lady are in the back. And when that lady said that to her, they were like biting their lips, trying, squeezing their lips shut so they wouldn't laugh out loud. But that's really what he's talking about here. He's talking about doing things that bring attention to yourself rather than giving God the glory. One writer put it this way. Jesus says at the end of that, he says, truly I say to you, they have received their reward. One writer put it this way. When I put my name on it, I take God's name off of it. Think about that one. In other words, I take credit for something God has done. I mean, those of you here, at our church, we're blessed, even though we're not that big a church. We have a lot of young people, guys and girls that are athletic and are successful at it. And you guys all have a lot of opportunity, but always keep in mind who gave you that ability, right? Always keep that in mind. You might be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but God gave you that ability. And today it's exciting that we have, in the Olympics, we've seen examples of that. We see it in all type of pro sports where people are outspoken about their faith. And when they have an opportunity, they'll say, hey, I give God all the glory. He gave me all my ability that I have. And you know that to play at the NFL level or the NBA level or any of the professional league level, you are gifted. You're the best player your high school ever saw. You're gifted beyond everybody else. And it's so easy for people to become arrogant in that. They make a ton of money. All these people want to, listen to them. It's so refreshing to hear somebody who says, I believe all the ability I got from God. And I give him the glory. And I give him the praise. And that's what he's talking about here. I want to apply this concept of giving to faith-based fundraisers. Okay? Now, this is faith-based fundraisers. And how many of you have ever gone to a fundraiser? Now, most of us have. And one thing you always got to keep in mind that when you go to a fundraiser, they're going to ask for funds. You know what I mean? They ask you to come and sit at a table. It's not the Amway way where you don't know until the last minute. You get hit. This is like everybody knows you're going to a fundraiser. They're going to ask you for funds. And there's a lot of different ways that people do that. And some I like. There, for example, the silent auction. I like that. And, and they got a sheet there, and you write down maybe your name and how much you're going to bid on this, but there's something you're going to get. And we all know that the people who, whatever you're going to get, someone donated that free of charge, and so they're going to, whatever money they make off of that goes to them. And so, you're going to get something, and you're going to give, and that's all good. And then there's like the give talk. You always go there. They always have somebody who at the end is going to close the deal, right? And on the table, they have a thing where you can fill out how much you're going to give and all that. And the person tells you the needs and tells you what's going on, tells you maybe how much money they need to raise or how much they need, all that. And they just tell it to you up front. And then they say, hey, man, as God places it on your heart, give as you feel led to give. That's awesome. And you sit down and go, yeah, I'm planning on this. And most of the time when you go to a fundraiser, you've thought about how much you're going to give before you ever go. And so there's that. And then I've been to some where they just take an offering, right? They tell you what it is, and they just take an offering. And you got to be careful with that, though. You got to know your audience. I went to a concert once where it was a love offering for the concert. So they had 500 people at this concert, and they took a love offering to pay for the band that was going to be there, give them some money. It was all high school kids. And this is a while ago, but high school kids just don't carry cash. And they don't know what it is really to give in an offering. So they took an offering, and I'll never forget. During the intermission, halfway through, they took another one. They were trying to get some money, but it's like, it was really funny. My all-time favorite story about taking an offering, though, is Tony Campolo. I've heard him a bunch of times, and he was talking about he was at this women's event at this church that was really extremely wealthy, and all of these ladies were there, and they were trying to raise $50,000 for this hospital that they supported, and he was the speaker, so he spoke, and the lady goes, Dr. Campolo, would you pray that God would give us $50,000 to help to build this wing onto this hospital? And Campolo said, no, I won't. Which shocked everybody. If you know Campolo, that's right up his alley. He goes, I won't pray, but I'll tell you what I will do. I'll take an offering. He says, and he goes, I made a mistake there. I said, whatever we don't make in this offering, I'll make up the difference. He said, I wish I wouldn't have said that. So he took an offering of all these rich people, and they raised like $55,000. And then Campolo said something that I've always thought about. He said, what? Never ask God for something you can do. He knew that they had plenty of money in that group to raise $50,000, and they did in one day. And yet they were going to ask God for it. And so there's that type of an offering. I have no problem with us taking an offering. But here's the caution. When you go public, God checks out. Just think about that one. When you go public, God checks out. What do you mean by that? Well, I've seen silent auctions become verbal auctions. Now, I don't have a problem with going to an auction. Like I went to a car auction once with a friend of mine, and that was a nerve-wracking experience because I'm sitting there in this car auction, and they were bringing out these cars, and then people were bidding on it, and I went up like this to scratch my head. My friend slapped my hand. He said, don't lift your hand up. Why? You'd have bought that car. It was a Lamborghini. No, it wasn't, but you know what I'm saying. So I have no problem. You go, you're going to buy a cow, and you go to a cow auction, and you're going to outbid the guy that's going to. That's not a big deal. What I'm talking here is about faith-based, where we start to auction things off, and pretty soon when you're auctioning against somebody else, it's easy from what you want to give as given to the Lord to become pride, like I'm going to let this dude outbid me. So we got to be careful of that. Another one is you get a paddle with a number on it. Now, we did that once, and it was hilarious until the end. Because Kathy's a talker, and she had the paddle. And she talks with her hands, and she'd be talking to people, and all of a sudden we got this bill for like $500, $800, $600. Every time she lifted her hand, there's 23, and she marks out the number, right? So you got to be careful with that. But you know how paddles go. I've been to some where people have a paddle, and they'll say, "How many of you can give $5,000? Lift up your paddle. How many can give it $4,000? Lift up." When that starts to happen, it's easy for it to go to your ego and not to go for the Lord. I'm talking about faith-based. I'm talking about giving to the kingdom of God. In other words, you got to be careful of that. And I've seen offerings that were a little crazy. I was at a meeting one time where they took an offering for this ministry, and everybody got up row by row, and you walked down the aisle, your row, and you walked up on the platform, and the celebrity preacher's holding the bucket, and you give the money right in front of him. Now that was to me like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, he puts it out, it goes like this, a little bit more. I mean, you know what I'm saying. So that's nerve-wracking me. But the bottom line is this. When you get into bidding war or a public declaration, you need to be careful that pride doesn't take the place of humility. Because it can happen quick. Because we all have egos. And we can turn from something that we want to give because we want to serve the Lord and give because the Lord's given to us into something where we're given because we're going to outbid somebody else. The idea would be this: be more concerned about what God thinks about than what people think about when it comes to you. As a preacher, we used to put it this way: be more concerned about what God thinks about your sermon than what your congregation thinks. First person you got to run it by is God. Am I true to the text? Am I saying what you want me to say? Am I not saying certain things because I'm afraid I'm going to offend certain people? You go through all that if you're the pastor, because you know situations and you know people and you know more about them than other people do. And it's easy for you to start saying, well, I don't want to say it this way, and I want to say it, and we start worrying about what everybody thinks instead of like, God, what do you think? Am I teaching your word the way I ought to teach it? Straight up, just give it out. And so give humbly. How do I do that? Well, look what he says. Verse 3, he says this. But when you give to the needy, and notice he didn't say if you give, when you give, he says, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. I can't do that. I looked it up. 1% of the population is ambidextrous. And if you're truly ambidextrous, you can write a sentence with your right hand and draw a picture with your left. If you're truly ambidextrous. My Seattle Mariners, I was really sad about this. They traded a pitcher they had who's ambidextrous. And he's kind of a one-of-a-kind guy. I have a picture of him coming up here in a sec. Maybe. There we go. I can't say his name. Gerangelo Sagente, does that seem right? Okay, don't worry about it, because you'll spend all day trying to figure it out. But this guy throws 96 miles an hour right-handed and 89 miles an hour left-handed. So he can pitch at the major league level with both hands, and this is his mitt. It's made to fit either hand. So he doesn't have to get a new mitt. It has two thumbs in it. So he can put it on his left hand and throw right-handed and then switch it and throw left-handed. So you can imagine the advantage you would have. Whoever they put up to the plate, you could switch hands and throw to them. But that's truly being ambidextrous. And Jesus is saying, hey, I want you to be ambidextrous when it comes to giving. Billy Graham put it this way. I liked his take on this verse. Here's what he says. He says, God has given us two hands, one to receive and one to give with. In other words, this hand, Lord, I'm taking it from you. And this hand, what? I'm giving it away. So often we think we give to get, but we don't give to get. We get to give. God blesses us in our life in order that we might give to other people. And then he says this. He goes on in verse 4 and he says, so that your giving may be in secret. And I think what he's trying to say here is this. There's a difference between you and God. That's private. It's personal. You should set it between you and God what you're going to give. And it should be in private so that you don't show off to other people what you're giving. One of the blessings of being in ministry that I've found over the years is the blessing of being the messenger to bless other people. You say, what do you mean by that? People sometimes come up to us as pastors, and Sarah's experienced it, Lexi's experienced it, Matt's experienced it, and they want us to give a gift, or they want to give me like a card, and they'll say, can you give this to this family? They don't want to give it to this family, but they want you to. And you know that there's something in there that's going to bless those people. You don't know what it is, but you're just the what? The messenger. And you walk up to people just randomly, you'll go like, hey man, this is not from me. Someone gave me this to give to you. And they'll open it up, and they'll be blessed by it. Well, I know that it's something that's going to bless them, so I get blessed. And I don't do anything, but just pass it on, right? There's a blessing in that. And I've seen how people have gotten blessed through that. And look at the last part here. He says this, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. God always rewards humility. He always does. The God who sees in secret will reward you. I love what Jesus said. Matthew 10:42, he says this, whoever gives even a cup of cold water will not lose his reward. The smallest act of kindness given in the name of Jesus will be rewarded. So often we think, well, I can't give as much as somebody else. It doesn't have anything to do with how much you give. It has to do with why did you give it? That's the key to the whole thing. And Jesus says here, a cup of cold water given to somebody will be rewarded. The smallest act of kindness you could come up with. One of my favorite movies is Ben-Hur. And I gave you two pictures here. And in the movie Ben-Hur, the top picture is Jesus giving the slave Ben-Hur a cup of water. He's in a slavery. He's getting drugged in the heat. Charlton Heston plays Ben-Hur. And all along the way, they run into Jesus out ministering. And Jesus gives Ben-Hur a cup of cold water. Later in the movie, Ben-Hur now is the adopted son of a Roman general. He gives a cup of cold water to Jesus as he's carrying his cross through the streets of Jerusalem. I love that movie. And when I thought about that as my illustration, I also thought about this. Thanks to Truett, who was great at this. T-shirts. So we have about 15 of these T-shirts left that says, I survived Ben-Hur, 3 hours and 32 minutes long. Okay? So, we have a bunch of these left over, and I was just going to give them to the Goodwill or whatever, and I decided, no, I'm going to put out the Ben-Hur challenge. We have a copy of Ben-Hur in the back. You can look online. It's 3.5 hours long. So if you watch that as a family, you can get a T-shirt. It's a great Easter movie. The only thing is, if you check out the Ben-Hur, you got to bring it back the next week. You can't just hold on to it because that's the only copy that I have is one. So there's a Ben-Hur challenge out there. You'll see the T-shirts. Feel free to sign up and watch that. If you've never seen it, it's long. It's a little slow at times, but it's a tremendous story of Christ. We also have a copy of The Passion of the Christ. If you've never seen that, you need to watch that. Not with your little kids. I would say high school and above. But it's a graphic example, probably the most accurate depiction of Jesus and his crucifixion ever created. And both those would be great movies as you head into Easter. So he said to give humbly. Secondly, he says pray humbly. Look what he says there in verse 5. He says that when you pray, he says, you must not be like the hypocrites, same word, and the hypocrites was a reference to the Pharisees. He said, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogue and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. In Jesus' day, the Pharisees prayed 3 times a day at a specific time each day. And they would stop wherever they were at in public and pray so that everybody could see them praying. And there were certain times, and whenever they were in the synagogue or on the street corner, they would stop and pray. And then they would pray out loud so everybody could hear them praying. And Jesus says about that, truly I say to you, they have received their reward. And what was their reward? To be heard by people. That was their reward. Think about this. If there's a fear of public speaking, there's got to be a fear of what? Public praying. Even a greater fear. I don't know many people who are looking to pray in public. I don't see a lot of volunteers for that. And some people looking at me like shaking their heads. You know, prayer can be like not a conversation with God, but it's almost like if I'm praying in public, I feel like I'm performing before these people. You know, you're afraid in your mind, like I'm opening my eyes and they're going to hold up like 10, 8.5. You know what I'm saying? You're going to worry about that. Or it can be so fearful that it makes you stumble or appear unprepared or forgetting what you're praying for. I told you about the time at church I was asked to pray, and I prayed for the food. Only problem was there was no food. Oh, Lord, bless this food. We're not having food. And then people realized he checked out on us, man. I don't know where Jones was at, but he wasn't there. One time I forgot a person's name. And Kathy was in the choir loft, which was behind. You know how that goes, the old church where you had the choir loft. And she's going, Dr. Martin, Dr. Martin. She's yelling his name so that, you know, Kath, you can hear her yelling it out there. And I'm going, Lord, be with and she knew right then and there that I didn't know the guy's name. And I scribbled, he was so boring that I'd scribbled on the notes and scribbled off his name. And so it was my own fault. So there I was. So that can be public prayer. And I want you to think about this. I thought about it, and a lot of you pray this, and I just have to say it because I pray it sometimes as well. But we like to pray the same prayer when we pray out loud publicly. And one of the greatest lines that get repeat all the time is, bless the hands that prepared it. How many of you ever prayed that? Yeah. Oh, yeah. How many of you, my dad prayed it every time, right? Oh, Lord, bless the hands that prepared it, which is really nothing more than shout out to mom. Yeah. Good meal, Mom, good job. Bless the hands that prepared it. So now if I said that, now if you pray it, you won't be able to say that. You're all messed up. And that was my goal, just to do that. But no, you get what I'm saying. But I'm going to give you this. Here's the point. Verse 6, look what he says. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. In other words, he's not talking here about never praying in public. I think one of the points here is this: pray in public like you would pray in private. Pray in public like you would pray in private. I'm going to give you a little prayer exercise. I've given this to you before, but I doubt if any of you really ever did it. So I'm going to challenge you to do this. And the prayer exercise is this: put a chair, an imaginary chair in your mind in the room with you. And when you pray, put God on that chair and pray to him and talk to him like you're talking to your friends. You start doing that, and then in public you try doing that, then you realize how often we pray not to God but to the people who are listening. And all of a sudden, like me, I have a hard time praying in public because I think about that. I'm trying to think about, I don't want to pray to the people here. I want to pray to God. It's really funny. God has a great sense of humor. I found this movie to watch last night, and Kathy and I watched it. It's called like Top of the Mountain or something like that. It's on Paramount. And it's about this guy who gets, like, he embezzles money from the church. He's this older guy. And this other preacher who's a lawyer. It's got complicated. But the old-time guy, when he prays, he says, he calls God, what did he call him? Yeah. No, Papa. He calls Papa. So he goes, well, I would do that, but Papa told me to do this. And the guy goes, Papa? Your dad told you? No, my heavenly Father. He called him Papa. And I thought to myself, wow, if that's not that respectful, then I remember, you know the verse. Abba Father, Daddy. And so this guy lived it out. Every time he prayed to Papa. And I thought to myself, God, you gave me this movie because I'm speaking on this. Randomly, I had no idea what it was going to say, but this guy had this intimate relationship with God where he just called him Papa and talked to him like he was talking to his Papa. And I thought, I just got to work at trying to pray that way, right? So there's a challenge there. And then start in private. Just imagine God's there and you're just talking, having a conversation with him. And then I found this verse, and this verse has really spoke to me. It's in Psalm 27, verse 8, and this is the New Living Translation. And in it, David says, my heart has heard you say, come and talk with me. And my heart responds, Lord, I'm coming. I'm coming to talk. And what he's trying to say there is the Lord is saying to us, hey, we need to talk. You know, when somebody says that, like come up to you, man, we need to talk. Usually you go, oh no, right? Right? But what if God says to you, hey, we need to talk. Just talk with me. You know, the New Testament talks about being constant in prayer or pray without ceasing. And I thought to myself, you know how easy that is? Because we can pray in our mind, right? We don't have to say it out loud. We don't have to bow our head and close our eyes. Matter of fact, when you're driving, not a good idea. But you can pray 24/7 all the time at work, when you're doing something. You can be having a conversation with God. You can throw things out there to him. You can let him know what's going on. And you know, Psalm 139:4 says, even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all together. Have you ever thought about that? I pray that all the time. Like, God, I don't know. You know what's going on. I'm praying for somebody. I don't really know what's going on with them, but I can say, you know, Lord, you know. Whatever their greatest need is, can you just help them out on that? Because you might not know anything. And you say, well, I can't pray for them. I don't know. Guess what? You don't have to know. God knows. When I worked at that boarding school, we had kids run away. And they'd be out in nowhere land, and you don't know where they're at, and you're nervous about that because there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. And I would always just remember the comfort I had being able to pray for them and saying, God, you know where he is. You know exactly where he is. You know exactly what's going on in his mind and in his heart. You know if he's in any danger. You know it. And so therefore, man, can you help him? Can you help us find him? Because we need some help with this. You know how great it is to know a God that knows everything? It's so awesome. And it even says when Paul said, hey, if you don't know how to pray, the Spirit what? Prays for you. And that's cool too. So I'm like, man, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to pray for this person, Lord, but you know it. I'll just leave it with you. And you do it. So that's what he says. And then look how he ends it. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. God always rewards what? Humility. He always does. One last one here real quick. He says, give humbly, pray humbly, and then fast humbly. Verse 16. And when you fast, now I got to be honest here, most of us don't fast on a regular or irregular basis. So a lot of people I know who fasted will say, oh, I'm fasting to lose weight, or I'm fasting for a cleansing, right? But there are reasons to fast and pray in the Bible. And I was going to go through those, and I decided I don't have time for that. So I just cut it out. But you can look up that and study that on your own. But I want you to notice when Jesus talks to them about fasting, it reminds me of Luke 18. And in Luke 18, the Pharisees, there's a parable about the Pharisee and a tax collector who come to the temple to pray. And Jesus starts off by telling us how arrogant the Pharisee prayed. In verse 11 in Luke 18, it says that the Pharisee prayed this way, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. Imagine you're praying, and there's this tax collector over here, and you're praying out loud so everybody can hear you, and I'm glad I'm not like this guy over here, right? Wow, that's pride. And then he says, I fast, verse 12, twice a week. It seemed from this parable that the Pharisees fasted twice a week. So you think about their weekly agenda, the Pharisees. They gave to the poor, they prayed 3 times a day, and they fasted twice a week. And in all of these things, they just wanted people to see them and wanted people to know what they were doing. So instead of fasting being private affair, notice what they did. He says, do not look gloomy. In other words, don't look sad or depressed like the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces. Okay, I looked that one up. What does that mean? It basically means this. They didn't wash their face or comb their hair. And I thought, ouch, I don't do that. That's my daily routine. And then he says this, that their fasting may be seen by others. In other words, they made sure that people knew they were fasting. You know, all of us know this to be true. It's so easy to tell people everything we do for the Lord. It is. It's so easy trying to do that. So easy trying to explain, well, I've done this, or I do this, or I've done that. By nature, we love to talk about ourselves and the things that we've done and experiences we've done. It's so hard for us to basically say, they don't need to know all of these things about me. I'm not in an interview here. I'm not trying to get a job. And so he basically says here, hey, when you fast, look what he says, verse 17. Anoint your head and wash your face. In other words, comb your hair, wash your face, get dressed. Verse 18, so that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. In other words, you know what he says here? Be normal. Be normal, dress normal, act normal. So you don't draw attention to yourself and make everybody think how spiritual you are because you're fasting. You know, I was thinking about that, and I thought about this. John the Baptist wasn't normal. He wasn't. He didn't dress normal, right? Camel hair and leather belt. And it's really interesting. If you read 1 Kings 1:8, it describes how Elijah dressed as an Old Testament prophet, and you'll find that John the Baptist dressed the same way that Elijah dressed. In other words, he wanted people to think, hey, I'm a prophet like what? Elijah. Matter of fact, a lot of people thought John the Baptist what? Was Elijah. So he didn't look normal. He didn't eat normal. Locusts and wild honey. I mean, I think it's organic and gluten-free. Just throwing that out there, okay? I thought deep and hard about that. I was starting to look up, the calorie count of a locust. But here's what I thought's interesting. It never said that he made his disciples dress and eat like him. Remember, John the Baptist had disciples. He had his own followers. He had a group of people that followed him. It never says that they, all of a sudden start eating locusts and wild honey, and they started to dress just like him. So you would know that they were a disciple of John the Baptist because they looked a certain way. They dressed a certain way. When you study the New Testament, you're going to find the Bible has more to say about being overdressed than underdressed. Remember growing up with your Sunday best? Remember that? I had a little bow tie I had to wear, a little sport coat. My Sunday go-to-meeting pants, my little black shoes. And we had this big hill at our church that kids played on after the service. And I would always be rolling and down the hill, and I'd tear a hole in my pants or get grass stain. I'd get a spanking when I got home because I didn't treat my Jesus clothes like they should be dressed. And all these little boys were in our go-to-meeting clothes. I wish I would have known the Bible better. I said, Mom, Dad, I'm way overdressed. But I didn't. But you get the point. And then he says this, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Hey, I want you to know something. There's nothing you do that God doesn't see. There's no thought that you have that God doesn't know. He's the God who sees in secret. He knows in secret. And you know what's great about it? He still what? He still loves us anyway. Isn't that great? I don't know about you. That's a blessing in and of itself. Because God not only forgives all the sins everybody else knows about you, but he forgives all the sins that no one knows about you but you. And some you don't even know. He forgives those. It's so exciting. But always keep in mind, God always what? Rewards humility. So this morning we focus on letting go of pride. And our takeaway is basically what? God always rewards humility. You know, Peter in that 1 Peter 5:6 simply says, the application would be what? Humble yourself. Humble yourself. The old saying is so true. Humble yourself, well, God will do it for you, right? Easier to do it yourself than to let God do it for you. But here's the application. Find one area of your life where you need to let go of pride and humble yourself. Then work on that this week. One area. Maybe it's what you say about yourself, maybe what you do, maybe whatever it might be. You know what it is. An area of your life where pride maybe has entered into your heart, and you know it. And say, Lord, take that pride away. Allow me just to be real and humble myself before you. This last Sunday, Kathy and I tried really hard to get to church. A lot of you know that we didn't make it. Yeah, I was supposed to speak last Sunday. And our flight got in at supposedly right around 10 o'clock to Redmond. We get to Redmond on our flight. We circle Redmond with a couple other planes. The fog's too low. We can't land. The guy comes on and says, hey, we're going to Portland. We get to Portland.
get off the plane. We have to get our luggage. Kathy gets us another flight at 8:15 in the morning. I'm going to be in Redmond at 9 out of Portland. Great. The morning comes. We didn't sleep much, like an hour, maybe that. Kathy, I don't think, slept at all night long. But I'm ready, man. I got my sermon ready to go. I'm going to be here by 9 o'clock. Our flight gets canceled at 8 o'clock. So then they say, well, the next flight's at 9:30 at night. We go, man, that ain't going to make it. Well, the guy goes, well, you can fly to Seattle. And then when you get to Seattle, you can get on a flight right after that. And you can be in Redmond at 9:45. And I thought, that's doable. So I had Skip all lined up. Poor Skip. Meet me at the airport. Ta-da! I'm ready to go. So we fly to Seattle. We land on the plane. Everything's looking good. We stay on the tarmac for 45 minutes to an hour because the plane in front of us, it can't back out so we can get in the slot because they don't have a pilot. So I'm stressed out. I'm texting, in between all this. And Kathy looks at me and she said, Kelley, you got to realize somebody don't want you there. So then my theological mind goes, is this Satan or God? I wanted it to be Satan. I tried, but Satan thwarted me. Remember that passage? I wanted it to be Satan, but it wasn't. It wasn't Satan at all. So I remember thinking to myself, I hope it's okay. I hope everything's going to go okay. And then Skip sent me a picture of Pat when he was speaking. And so I was dying to know. So I go, looks like everything went well. And then Skip texts me back, God showed up. And it was humbling. It really was. God showed up, and he showed me this, that what Compass needed was not that I would show up, but that he would show up. Because I get to see myself, 10:15, 10:20, I bust through the door, sermon in hand, the pastor on the white horse, coming to save the congregation. Kelley's here, yay! It was just the opposite. It was, I don't want to tell you this, but I'm glad you didn't show up. We had a great service. And they're all going like, oh, it's so great. I'm thinking, oh, God, humble me. Just beat me down. But then I also thought about this. What a great church we have. What a great God we have. And Matt and I quickly learned we don't have to be here for God to work. Matter of fact, God worked better when we weren't. I don't want, hopefully that doesn't become a norm. But you know what I'm saying. So at first it was like humble pie, and then it was what? Then it was excitement. And I want you guys to know that as one of your pastors, I'm proud of you. Proud of Sarah. I called Sarah up at 5 in the morning. I text her thinking, well, when she wakes up, I go, just call me when you wake up. A minute later, she calls me. I was impressed. Sarah's up. Well, she hadn't slept all night because she had a migraine headache. And she didn't sound great either. Like, what? Dude? I'm saying, I'm going to be there, though. You hold on, I'm going to be there. I guess she texts later, I don't think he's going to make it. And that was before I ever knew I wasn't going to make it, right? And then I got a hold of Skip, and I got a hold of Pat. And I'm trying to text Pat. Pat doesn't always get back right off the bat. I'm just saying. So I'm nerve-wracking, like, oh, Pat. Then I thought, well, I got to let Matt know. I didn't want to stress him out, but then I thought, well, he's the lead pastor. He should know. So I let him know. Then all of a sudden, he's all worked. We're all, me and him are the ones that are all panicked. Everybody else is just going, okay, we'll make this happen. And then I heard the only thing people missed was the coffee and the donuts. One lady goes, hey, where's the donuts for my kids? Or none of us know how to use the coffee machine. It wasn't like teach me how to preach a sermon. It's like teach me how to run the coffee machine. All that being said, it was just an exciting time. Great time for our church to bond together, to worship the Lord. A great time for me to realize that, hey, guess what? Hey, everybody has their job. Everybody has their responsibility. But it's not just you. It's the Lord. Hey, maybe you're here today. It's pride that keeps people out of heaven. It totally is. I mean, to follow Jesus means you got to humble yourself. You got to admit that you're a sinner before a holy God. And you got to know that you need forgiveness, and you got to go to him and say, Jesus, would you forgive me of my sin? And then you got to follow him, which means you got to put yourself down. Humble yourself to follow Christ. Take yourself off the throne of your life and put Christ on the throne. And those of us who are believers, we know how easy it is to put yourself back on the throne. It's a battle. Who's going to control my life today, this moment? And you know that is. It's a battle we fight over pride, over wanting to control our own life instead of allowing God to control us. So when it comes to pride today, God says, hey, I always will reward humility. Always. The humble person is the person that God will give you unmerited favor. And he remembers everything we do if we do it in the spirit of humility. Let's pray.